In a moment of unscripted and profound emotion, Hollywood icon Denzel Washington found his composure undone during a live television broadcast after an unforeseen phone call from Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. The content of their conversation left the studio audience and global viewers in a state of collective awe. This remarkable exchange served as a powerful testament to how genuine leadership and mutual respect can bridge any divide, be it geographical, cultural, or the chasm of celebrity. The evening began with the familiar fanfare of a late-night talk show. The crowd roared its approval as Denzel Washington graced the stage, his smile easy and his demeanor come the epitome of a legend. His host engaged him with vibrant energy, sharing humorous anecdotes and showcasing clips from his most recent film. Yet, beneath Denzel's affable laughter, a quiet detachment lingered in his gaze, a hint that his spirit was elsewhere. Midway through the interview, the host, beaming, announced, "We have something special arranged for you tonight, Denzel, a live connection to someone a considerable distance away." Denzel, momentarily perplexed, queried, "What sort of special arrangement?" The large screen behind them flickered to life, displaying the flag of Burkina Faso. A ripple of confusion went through the audience. Then, a voice emerged, commanding, dignified, yet gentle. "Good evening, Mr. Washington. This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso." Denzel was instantly still. A profound stillness settled over the studio. For the first time in the program's history, the only audible sound was the sharp intake of one man's breath. No one could have possibly anticipated what was to follow. The audience watched, captivated, as Denzel's hands began to tremble while the president spoke, his English carrying the cadence of his native French, his tone composed but deeply sincere. "You do not know me, Mr. Washington, but at the age of 14, I was a boy with no shoes in Burkina Faso. I watched you in the film Glory. I saw a black man who was not pleading, not fearful, but powerful, and weeping for justice." Denzel's rapid blinking was the only betrayal of the torrent of emotions rising within him. That evening the president continued, "I declared to my mother, one day I will also fight for my people, just like him." The host's expression was one of pure astonishment. Denzel raised a hand to cover his mouth. Ibrahim went on, years afterward, "When my country's people required someone to take a stand, I recalled your strength, your conviction, your eyes. I stood up not because I was without fear, but because you had shown me the face of courage." The room remained utterly silent. Denzel gradually lowered his hand, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Are you saying that I played a part in shaping a president?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "No, sir," Ibrahim answered gently. "You played a part in shaping a man who refused to submit to injustice." A solitary tear traced a path down Denzel's cheek. "Thank you, my brother." The crowd let out a soft collective sigh. However, the president's subsequent words were even more impactful. Denzel leaned in toward the screen, and the host sat motionless, his eyes wide. Ibrahim spoke once more. "Today, I am addressing you not merely as a president, but as a man who carries a debt. In Burkina Faso, when an individual saves your spirit, we never forget." Denzel, humbled, shook his head. "No, please, I did nothing." "Mr. Washington," Traoré insisted, "I am formally extending an invitation for you to be honored in Ouagadougou. But beyond that, I wish to name a leadership academy in your honor, place where our youth will learn to stand with dignity, just as I was taught by watching you." Another wave of gasps swept through the audience. The host could only whisper, "Wow." Denzel's voice fractured as he responded, "Mr. President, I am not worthy of such an honor." Traoré offered a gentle smile. "That is precisely why you are." As the call concluded and the screen faded to black, there on national television before millions, Denzel Washington hid his face in his hands and wept not tears of sorrow, but of the staggering realization that a single life's work could create echoes across oceans and through generations. This, however, was merely the prologue. In less than a day, Denzel would be preparing for a journey. Burkina Faso was beckoning, and the events that awaited him there were destined to resonate around the globe. Sleep offered no respite for Denzel that night. He continuously replayed Ibrahim Traoré's words. his eyes remaining shadowed with emotion. Long after the television lights had dimmed, by dawn, the digital world had erupted. Denzel and Traoré was a top trend in more than 20 nations, with fans, journalists, and world leaders lauding the poignant exchange. Many were heralding it as one of the most significant moments in television history. But as the world buzzed, Denzel was methodically packing a bag not for a film set, but for a journey that felt like a sacred calling. He secured a seat on the next flight to Burkina Faso, traveling without an entourage or the glare of the spotlight. All he carried was a small backpack and a heart brimming with feelings he could not yet articulate. As the aircraft ascended, he gazed out the window and murmured, "I am uncertain of what I will find, but I am certain I must go." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, President Traoré stood by a palace window, his eyes fixed on a distant runway. His aides inquired, "Sir, shall we assemble the press?" Traoré simply shook his head. No cameras, no speeches, only truth. Something of great consequence was poised to happen. Neither of them could know that in just 2 days they would both be moved to tears once more, this time in each other's presence. When Denzel's plane touched down, the tarmac was devoid of the usual media circus and red carpets. There was only a quiet dignity. A black SUV was parked, and a single man stood beside it, attired in simple clothing, without any military decorations. It was him, President Ibrahim Traoré. Denzel disembarked, and as their gazes connected, a silent understanding passed between them that rendered words unnecessary. They embraced not as a global celebrity and a head of state, but as to men whose paths had miraculously intersected. "Across continents, I am honored by your presence," Ibrahim stated. Denzel offered a faint smile. "I did not come as a star. I came as a brother." The SUV carried them along dusty roads. Through bustling neighborhoods and markets where barefoot children ran and waved as they passed, unaware of the vehicle's occupants, they came to a stop before a humble dwelling of sun-bleached clay and tin. "This was my childhood home," Traoré said quietly. He pushed open the door to reveal an interior free of guards or opulence-only aged photographs, a woven floor mat, and a profound silence. Traoré then presented Denzel with a creased photograph. In it, a small boy was holding the hand of an elderly woman. "She raised me while my parents toiled from dawn till dusk. She fed me, washed me, and filled my head with stories of resilience." He paused, then added softly, "And she is still alive." They drove for another hour through meandering village lanes. The silence in the car was companionable. Denzel studied the photo of the woman, noting her broad smile, kind eyes, and a strength that only the passage of time can bestow. "Where is she now?" Denzel inquired. A muscle tightened in Traoré's jaw. "She continues to work, cleaning classrooms in a rural school." Denzel turned to him, astonished. At 85, the president nodded. "She has never requested assistance. She says, 'God granted me legs. I will use them until he calls them back.'" Upon their arrival, the school appeared weathered but teemed. With life, children played barefoot, their laughter echoing as they drew patterns in the dust with sticks. And then Denzel saw a figure, bent with age, but radiating an undeniable dignity, holding a broom. The same woman from the photograph. Denzel exited the car, transfixed. Traoré walked towards her. She looked up, and for a fleeting instant, her eyes filled with tears. "Ibrahim," she whispered. He rushed to embrace her. "Maman Hawa," they wept. Together, then, Denzel approached. She looked at him, her breath catching in her throat, her hands trembling. You are him," she uttered, reaching out to touch his face. In that quiet courtyard in Burkina Faso, time itself seemed to pause. 3 souls, 3 distinct histories, converged in a single moment that would touch the hearts of millions. But the events to come would stir the entire nation. Maman Hawa sat positioned between Denzel and President Traoré, sheltered by the shade of a venerable baobab tree near the school. Her hands were calloused, and her posture slightly stooped, yet her voice retained its warmth. She recounted tales of a young Ibrahim, of how he would seek comfort in her arms on cold nights, and how he once gave her his only portion of mango. To ensure she would not be hungry, Denzel listened with a gentleness in his expression that the public seldom witnessed. She then reached into the pocket of her worn apron. "I have kept this through all the years," she explained, unfolding a yellowed piece of paper. On it, in a child's script, were the words, "One day I will be a leader, and I will find you, Mama, I promise." Traoré gasped, the memory flooding back. He had penned that note at age 9, on her birthday, after she had given him her only slice of bread. Denzel wiped away a tear. She had held on to hope, the most resilient form of faith. Just then, young student ran towards them, barefoot and joyful, clutching a cracked plastic ball. "Mama, will you play?" And she did, still barefoot, still smiling. Something profound shifted within Denzel. He was no longer a mere visitor. He had stumbled upon something sacred. That evening, Denzel and Traoré made their way back to the palace. But the atmosphere between them had transformed. Both men were enveloped in a quiet contemplation. After some time, Traoré rose. "I wish to show you something I have never revealed to anyone outside of my family." He guided Denzel down a private corridor, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. At the corridor's end stood a heavy wooden door, which he unlocked. The small, dimly lit room inside was filled with old books, journals, maps, and a single large framed photograph of Maman Hawa and a young, laughing Ibrahim. "This chamber holds my true wealth," Traoré confessed. Denzel was left speechless. Traoré lifted an old notebook, its pages filled with handwritten aspirations for Burkina Faso. "All of this began with her. I am standing here because she believed I had worth, even when I possessed nothing." Denzel gently touched a page. "You lead like a son who remembers love." Traoré nodded. "And I want the world to understand that leadership is not an exercise in power, but an act of gratitude." A reverent silence filled the room. Two great men, united by one mission, to honor the woman who had molded a president. And Denzel had an idea, one that would catch everyone, especially Maman Hawa, by surprise at sunrise. Denzel sat on the palace terrace, observing the light spread over Ouagadougou, the image of Maman Hawa's face, her laughter, her fortitude replayed in his mind. Ibrahim soon joined him. "I've been thinking," Denzel said, over a cup of tea, "let's bestow upon her the honor she never sought." A slow smile spread across Traoré's face. "I was hoping you would suggest that." Later that day, discreetly and without notifying the press, they returned to the village school with a small retinue. Children gathered, and teachers watched, in silence. Maman Hawa appeared bewildered. "What is happening?" Then, President Traoré knelt before her, presenting a small velvet box. Inside lay a golden medallion, engraved with her name and the national seal. "For your service to this nation, as a mother, a teacher, and a guardian of hope," he said, his voice trembling. The children erupted in applause. Denzel then came forward, his own eyes misty, and from the world of cinema, he began, producing an envelope. "I spoke with my producer this morning. Your story is going to be made into a film, and every cent of the proceeds will go toward building schools in your name." Maman Hawa sank to her knees, overcome with sobs. She had dedicated her life to giving, and now she was receiving. Yet, the most significant surprise was yet to come. 3 days later, Denzel Washington was back in Los Angeles for a live television interview on a major American talk show. The program was intended to be lighthearted, filled with talk of red carpets, upcoming movies, and laughter. But behind his smile, a fundamental change had occurred. As the cameras rolled and the host asked about his trip to Africa, Denzel paused. Then he said, "May I take a phone call?" The host, bemused, chuckled, "Live on air." Denzel nodded. The production crew scrambled, but in moments, the screen behind him came alive. It was President Ibrahim Traoré, broadcasting live from Burkina Faso. The studio audience fell utterly silent. "Mr. Washington," Traoré began warmly, "your visit served as a reminder that kindness is not constrained by borders." He then added, "You honored my people. Today, I wish to honor someone you inspired." He gestured to his side, and Maman Hawa appeared on the screen holding a phone, her eyes bright with emotion. The audience gasped. Denzel's lips trembled, his hand shaking. Traoré continued, "You reminded the world that even those with the most powerful voices must sometimes pause to listen." And then, Maman Hawa whispered in hesitant English, "Thank you, my son." Denzel bowed his head and wept on live television, and millions watching around the world wept with him. Within minutes, the clip had gone viral. The story was no longer about films. It was about something far more profound. Twitter was ablaze. Hashtag MAMANHAWA. President of Hearts. Hashtag Denzel Breaks. Silence. From Paris to Johannesburg, from Tokyo to Atlanta, people began sharing their own stories of the women who had raised and shaped them. An old photograph of Traoré embracing Maman Hawa in her kitchen became an icon of love and gratitude. International news channels interrupted their political coverage to broadcast the moment. Denzel's emotional breakdown, Traoré's gentle words, Maman Hawa's simple thank you. CNN described it as the most human moment ever captured on live television. But something even more astonishing started to happen. Donations began to pour into a modest GoFundMe page, quietly set up by a student from the village school with a goal of $10,000 in just 2 hours. It surpassed $1 million. People weren't just watching, they were feeling, and they were acting. In a world often fractured by division, this story of a soldier's promise, a mother's love, and an actor's tears was uniting strangers. But while the world celebrated, Maman Hawa's strength was ebbing, and she had one final request. By the 6th day of this unforgettable week, Maman Hawa's body was weary. She had smiled for days, embraced dozens, and conversed with presidents and stars, but her body was whispering its limits. She knew her time was short, so she asked for a private word with Denzel and Ibrahim. They came to her small room in the village. No cameras, no microphones, just 3 souls. "I am old," she said softly, her voice frail but clear. "I will not be here for the next planting season." Both men shook their heads, urging her to rest, to remain strong, but she smiled. "I feel no fear. My only wish is that no child in Burkina Faso ever attends school with an empty stomach." A tear slid down Traoré's cheek. She reached for Denzel's hand. "And you tell stories that have meaning. The world pays attention to you. Tell this story." Then she retrieved a small, faded, torn scarf from under her pillow, stitched with care. It was the one young Ibrahim used to tie around her arm when he played at being president. She placed it in Traoré's hands. "My first medal," she whispered. And then she spoke her last words. "Take care of each other." They both held her as she closed her eyes. The sun was rising outside, and so was her legacy. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in silence at Maman Hawa's bedside, the scarf still clutched in his hand. The room smelled of sea butter and old paper. Denzel knelt at her feet, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with grief. Quietly, Traoré spoke. "She gave me everything when I had nothing, and now I must give everything back." He turned to Denzel and held up the scarf like a sacred relic. "We will build something in her name, a school, a garden, a future." Denzel looked up, his eyes swollen. Yes, we will. I will help." Outside, the villagers had gathered, a silent understanding passing among them that she was gone. Traoré stepped out, faced the crowd, and raised the scarf. "Maman Hawa has gone to her rest, but her spirit will nourish generations." The crowd erupted in a wave of sorrow. In less than 12 hours, the news had circled the globe. Burkina Faso declared a national day of mourning for Maman Hawa. Traoré made another vow during a press conference that night: "Every child in Burkina Faso will know her name." And Denzel quietly canceled all his forthcoming professional obligations. He stated simply, "I have portrayed kings and generals, but today I serve a mother." The next morning, the sun rose gently over Burkina Faso. A plain wooden coffin rested in the middle of the village square. There were no golden adornments, no velvet ropes, only flowers, the beat of drums, and a profound silence. President Traoré walked behind the casket, alone, carrying only the scarf. Denzel followed, his suit rumpled, his eyes red. They exchanged no words, none were necessary. Messages of condolence arrived from leaders across the world, but the most touching tribute came from a young boy in Niger who had walked barefoot for 2 days to deliver a letter that read, "Thank you for raising our president." As the casket was lowered into the earth, the village sang, children wept, and elders clutched their hearts. A bird landed on the grave and remained there, still. Then, an unexpected event occurred. Denzel stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a necklace. It had belonged to his father. He whispered, "She reminds me of him." strong, quiet, and never asking for anything. He laid it on the grave and said, "Goodbye, Mama." Even the news cameras stopped filming. Some moments are too sacred for the screen. That night, President Ibrahim Traoré and Denzel Washington sat under the stars on a straw mat in complete silence. A small fire crackling between them, they needed no speeches. They had just buried the woman who had profoundly shaped both of their lives, one with her hands, the other with her spirit. Then Traoré spoke. "Denzel, this week I was reminded of who I am." Denzel nodded. "Me too." In the stillness of the night, they formed a pact, not one recorded in ink, but one sealed by grief, gratitude, and hope. Within hours, plans were underway for the Maman Hawa Foundation, a joint initiative to provide food, education, and emotional support to rural children in Burkina Faso and beyond. Denzel pledged his full year's salary from his next movie to the cause, but the most powerful element was not the money. It was a short new video Denzel released just before his departure. He looked directly into the camera and said, "If one woman in a small village can raise a future president and change the heart of a Hollywood actor, then what are we waiting for?" That video garnered 100 million views in 24 hours. The world held its breath, anticipating what would follow. 3 days after the funeral, Denzel returned to the U.S. without fanfare. However, the producers of his long-scheduled live interview insisted it proceed, as it had been heavily promoted. Denzel consented on one condition, that he be allowed to speak from the heart without a script. The set was brightly lit, the audience expectant, anticipating light conversation and perhaps a joke or two. But when the host asked, "Denzel, you've seen the world. What single moment has truly changed your soul?" He didn't answer immediately. He simply retrieved something from his coat pocket. It was the scarf. Then he whispered into the microphone, "President Ibrahim Traoré called me, and I couldn't breathe. He reminded me that greatness isn't found in awards. It's found in mothers who tend to your wounds and in presidents who remember them." The host, visibly taken aback, asked, "And what were his exact words?" Denzel's eyes filled with tears. He slowly took out his phone, played a voice recording, and let the studio hear Traoré's words, "Thank you for honoring a woman the world forgot, but who made a man the world remembers." And with that, Denzel broke down in front of millions. The broadcast spread like a contagion. Dinners were paused, newsrooms fell silent, and social media froze. The clip of Denzel sobbing, clutching the scarf, while President Traoré's voice played, became the most shared video of the year. Comments flooded in. "I've never cried so hard for a stranger's love. This makes me want to call my mother, right?" Now, who is Ibrahim Traoré? The world needs more leaders like him. Across Africa, stories of overlooked mothers began to emerge. In America, youth groups held candlelight vigils for Maman Hawa. But in Burkina Faso, something even more extraordinary happened. Children in villages all over the country started writing letters, not to celebrities, but to President Traoré. One letter asked, "If I work hard like you, will I also make my mother proud?" Denzel remained silent after the interview until the following morning, when he posted a single photo on his Instagram, a lone tree in Burkina Faso. The caption read, "She watered roots that now hold up nations." No hashtags, no promotion, just truth. And the world watched and wept. Exactly 1 week after the surprise phone call, a statue was quietly unveiled in Ouagadougou. It was not a monument to a general, a king, or a president. It depicted a woman holding a child's hand, a familiar scarf wrapped around it, a bronze plaque beneath read, "To Maman Hawa, the mother of all leaders." President Ibrahim Traoré stood before it with Denzel Washington at his side, both holding candles. Neither man spoke, for some conclusions are too sacred for words. That night, a gentle wind swept through the city, and villagers claimed they could feel Maman Hawa's spirit brushing against their skin. And in Hollywood, Denzel made a final, powerful gesture. He announced a new scholarship, the Hawa Fund, in partnership with the government of Burkina Faso, dedicated to girls from rural Africa with dreams of leadership. As the press clamored for a statement, Denzel simply said, "Some phone calls change your schedule. This one changed my soul." Dear friends, if this story resonated with you, if it brought you to tears, prompted you to think, or brought to mind someone you cherish, please show your support by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below with the words, "I believe in the power of love and leadership." Your voice is important. Let's help stories like this one travel across the globe. Let's remind each other that true greatness is not measured by fame, but by the capacity of one's heart. Share your reflections below. Pass this video on to someone who could use a measure of hope today. And never forget that a single act of kindness can reverberate through generations. Thank you for your time.